Good afternoon, Miss Amber. Are you the presiding officer today?
I guess she disappeared there for a second, but yeah, David, Judith will be presiding today.
Thank you, Isaac. How you doing, Leslie?
Sorry, was that David saying hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Good, how are you?
Good. Another day in paradise.
Well, it is kind of a little paradisiacal. It's very nice. It's so gorgeous here. Well, with the cool weather,
Yes, ma'am.
taking advantage of it.
Hey, Judy, it's Nancy. Can you hear me?
Judy, can
I
you
can.
hear any of
I
us?
can, Nancy.
Can you say something? Because we can't hear you, it seems, or.
Good afternoon, everyone.
All right, we can hear
It
you.
is now 2 p.m. and this is a public hearing in case number 20-00175 UT in the matter of potential amendments to NMPRC Rule 17.9.570 NMAC entitled Governing Cogeneration and Small Power Production. This case started with a petition filed by El Paso Electric Company for amendments to NMPRC Rule 17.9.570, filed on August 28th, 2020. There was an initial order granting the petition issued by the commission on September 2nd, 2020, asking for comments. There was an order dated January 19th, 2021, order and notice of proposed rulemaking amending NMPRC Rule 17.9.570 to comply with FERC Order 872-A. In that order, it attached a proposed rule as Exhibit A. It was published in the New Mexico Register, and it was provided to all interested parties. It requested that interested persons file their written initial comments on the proposed rule no later than May 10th, 2021, and written responses on May 24th, 2021, and set today, June 28th, 2021 at 2 p.m. for the public hearing. In addition, there was an order issued on May 11th, extending staff's deadline for filing initial comments. And on June 3rd, there was an order permitting further reply comments. We have received comments in this docket as follows. Staff's initial comments on September 9th. Comments of Lee County Electric Cooperative on September 11th. Comments of Western Farmer Electric Co-op on September 14th. Comments of New Mexico Rural Electric Cooperative Association on September 14th. SPS's comments on September 14th. Initial comments of El Paso Electric on September 14th. P&M's initial comments on September 14th. After the NOPR was issued, on May 10th, we received comments from SPS, initial comments on the same date from Jason Marks, comments from EPE and P&M on the same date. On May 14th, we received utility division staff's comments. On May 24th, we received response comments of New Mexico Rural Electric Cooperative Association. On May 24th, we received staff's reply comments. On the same date, we received SPS's reply comments. And on the same date, we received El Paso Electric and P&M's joint reply comments. Then on June 10th, we received further reply comments from Western Farmers, from Jason Marks, from SPS, and from El Paso Electric jointly with P&M. So as I stated, today we are having the public hearing. I have a list of participants that have signed up to participate. And I would request that since this is a public hearing and we would like to actually not hear people say, we adopt our comments, because there may be other people here who may not have read your comments, and therefore they may not know what you said, and then that doesn't facilitate a public discussion. That being said, you do not have to read your comments verbatim. We requested a 3-minute limit, but if somebody would like to go beyond that, we could entertain that. So with that, I will start the public hearing in no particular order except the way it is drafted on this list of participants. And the first person that I have is Tim Woolley from Tri-State Generation and Transmission Association. Is Tim Woolley here?
Yes, Miss Amer, I'm here. I don't have any
I don't
comments at
see
this.
him, so I will go on to Jason Marks. Is Jason Marks here?
Judy, I just got an email from Jason saying he's having trouble
I
connecting.
don't see
He's
Jason
connected to
Marks
the wrong.
here at this time.
Excuse me, Ms. Hamer.
Antonio R. Sanchez from Roosevelt County Electric Cooperative.
Judy, are you
Antonio
able to hear me?
Sanchez, are you
Judith, I'm
present?
here.
I
I'm
see
sorry.
you present. Did
Yes,
you
I'm here.
unmute yourself?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Mr. Sanchez,
I'm
I see you.
I'm trying to talk. I don't. Can you not hear me?
I can hear you.
Hello?
Hello? Judy, we can all hear each other fine. You just can't hear us. I'm not sure what's going on.
Okay. Let's try.
Judy,
Oh, yeah, I guess the volume was down. All right, sorry. Mr. Sanchez, please go ahead.
No, I was just checking in. I'm here.
Uh,
And Judy,
Yes.
it looks like Jason Marks is here now too.
oh, okay. All right. Is Tim Woolley here too?
Yes, Miss Amer, I'm on.
Okay. So I'm sorry I didn't hear you, Mr. Woolley, but I hear you now. And would you like to make a public comment on behalf of Tri-State Generation and Transmission Association?
No, thank you. At this time, I'm here to I'm here to listen and see where this goes.
Okay, thank you. Next, Mr. Jason Marks, are you present now? And would you, were you available to hear any of the prefatory remarks?
Miss Amer, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. No, I did not hear any of the prefatory remarks, but I am prepared to stand on my written filed comments unless there are questions or unless new issues come up during this hearing.
Thank you. Actually, one of the prefatory comments I made was we're requesting that you actually summarize briefly your written comments, since there are probably people here who may not have read them. And it would facilitate the discussion if you could do that.
Okay, I will try that. I'm using my phone for this, so let me know if there's any problems with the audio or visual. My comments are directed towards giving the commission recommendations for a rule that would support the development of projects under PURPA that are true projects, non-speculative projects that would add diversity to the resources that are currently being developed in New Mexico. In my response comments, I acknowledge that without PURPA projects, but because of our Renewable Energy Act, we have a lot of renewable energy, but there's a diversity need, or there's a value to diversity for projects that are not necessarily sponsored by utilities, and the state doesn't have those today. I am recommending that in the rule on when a legally enforceable obligation is created, that the commission just stick with the basics of site control and, excuse me here. Applying for relevant permits, but that some of the requirements that the commission has proposed are unnecessary and would just be barriers to real projects. They would just be ways to discourage developers from doing projects. And in particular, the financing application requirement just does not relate to how projects are actually financed. And if the commission's intention is to separate projects that are purely speculative from projects that can be built in, that are being done seriously, that a developer has invested money in, the first three criteria are sufficient to do that. And the only purpose for enacting the remaining criteria that the commission proposed would be to try and create additional hurdles to discourage development. And then with respect to the pricing side, it's there's been some debate about the Western and EIM and whether that's an LMP price. I think the parties would agree that the Western EIM is not a day-ahead market with LMP pricing. Could it establish information about pricing potentially? My comments were that even with the Southwest Power Pool, which does have LMP prices, that that can be a basis for projecting prices. But if QF projects are going to be built, they're going to need long-term fixed pricing, and the commission can use a lot of information in deciding what that is, but the price needs to be something that's established at the start of the project when the legally enforceable obligation is created. In the absence of that, if it's purely variable pricing that can change based on avoided costs or LMPs changing over time, no developer is going to be able to finance that, and you won't have projects. So my recommendation was that the commission take all that information into consideration, and that the commission does have the ability to develop fair and reasonable prices that would be fair to both utility consumers and QF developers. And also that the rule needs to have something about a capacity rate that was left out of the proposed rule. So thank you for the ability to, or the opportunity to summarize my comments, and I'm certainly happy to answer questions. And I'll continue to listen in to see if there's anything further at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marks. Next on the list is Mr. Antonio R. Sanchez Jr. from Roosevelt County Electric Cooperative.
Good afternoon. I am here really just to listen in. I don't really have anything to share at this moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. John Reynolds, NMPRC staff, Utility Division Director.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm staff focused on energy pricing, parameters that currently exist, and our view that has led to very little of these developments or extremely small developments. So to that end, staff is proposing to expand the list of possible pricing benchmarks to include competitive solicitations. Those are likely to be long-term solicitations as New Mexico is continuing its energy transition, as the investor-owned utilities are required to embark on. And that is the gist of staff comments at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Next is Mr. Lance R. Adkins of Farmers Electric Cooperative.
Yes, good afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to listen in today. We did not provide any formal comments in this proceeding, but certainly support those comments made through our statewide association, NMRECA, and the comments that have been supplied by our wholesale supplier, Western Farmers Electric Cooperative. We do have concerns about the discussion on avoided cost pricing. I do agree that the current rules probably have been limiting on the number of projects that have gone forward. We have done a number of interconnection studies here at Farmers Electric. The reason for that is the pricing. The groups or the projects that have looked at interconnecting have difficulty making a project go forward or develop based on the current or historical low prices of the avoided cost in our area. And we believe that that mechanism should remain in place as a protection for consumers. As a consumer-owned, member-owned cooperative, we are certainly price sensitive. And I think some of the things that are being proposed about a small project being able to come in and force prices above avoided cost pricing would certainly disadvantage our members over time. I think collectively at Western Farmers, we have done a good job at developing renewable energy projects at very low cost competitive with the cost of fuel that would be used in conventional power plants. And I believe we should have the freedom to be able to do projects that benefit our members long-term, pricing-wise, and not have to go through some lengthy process and more expensive process. That's the few comments that I would have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Atkins. Next on the list is Mr. Ron Flax-Davidson of the International Investment Group.
Thank you, Ms. Maynard. Wanted to first indicate that I support the comments made by Mr. Marks with regard to the importance of having a legally enforceable obligation at a point in time that would permit the financing of a project. And so the current rules of site control and permitting make sense. We don't need speculative projects, but at the same time, having a project required to be completely constructed before a LEO is issued makes no sense and just means there won't be any projects, because no one will build a project on speculation without knowing whether or not the LEO will be entered into. The second item is with regard to pricing, and again, support Mr. Marx's view that the Western EIM is probably not a mechanism or a market that meets the test for knowing what is a price. And secondly, that the need for a long-term fixed pricing is a requirement for most large-scale projects. In that regard, the comment made by Mr. Atkins from Western Farmers with regard to avoided cost, he made the statement that he thought it was important to protect consumers, and he's absolutely right. I think we share that view. But I also think just because the last couple of years may have been low energy prices doesn't mean that that will remain the case in the future. As a matter of fact, we've seen natural gas prices spike recently. And so protecting consumers, the question of what's the right price is not what it was yesterday or last year, but what it's expected to be over the next useful life of the project, 10, 15, 20 years. And on that basis, while it is difficult sometimes to determine an exact price, certainly it would be good to pick a price which has both historical context and future context, and that would give the most likelihood for success both for the project and for consumers. If prices go up, then at least they have a fixed price that would be below that in the future. Final comment I wanted to make was with regard to the rules. And to date, we have seen that power purchase agreements have been entered into with parties who then can sell to customers who have net metering. And I would like to make sure that we would see that going forward into the future. And I think the rules are a little bit complicated or unclear with regard to that. But again, it is good that the utilities and PNM in particular have interpreted it in that way. And we just want to make sure that that would continue going forward. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flax-Davidson. Next on the list of participants is Mr. Peter Gould. And I'm not sure that Mr. Gould is present. So I'll move on to David Sonntag of Western Farmers Electric Cooperative.
Yeah, this is David Sonntag. If it's okay, I'd like to defer my comments to Matt Caves from Western Farmers.
Certainly. Is Matt Cave on?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Amir Commission. Appreciate the opportunity. I would clarify Mr. Flax-Davidson's comment. Mr. Atkins is with Farmers, who is a member of Western Farmers Electric Co-op, and that's something that I think we tried to state throughout our comments. Western Farmers Electric Cooperative is a G&T cooperative with 21 member owners that provide distribution at the retail level. That is something that we try to continue to clarify. Western Farmers is a member of SPP, the RTO, and the market. With that in mind, I would stand by the comments that we have submitted to date. The avoided costs as established are allowed by FERC. Those LMPs do reflect the purchasing utilities avoided energy costs. Now, I understand that Mr. Marks and Mr. Davidson would like to see a set price and a set term, but the way that FERC Order 872 and PURPA allows, we provide the avoided cost. We are here to protect the price and reliability for our member owners. With that in mind, also I've heard the statement that, what protects if the prices go up. At the same time, a long-term fixed price may be reciprocated and be above and beyond what the LMP or the avoided cost of which Western Farmers is purchasing from the market. And those things need to be taken into consideration. And we point that out. And again, in for FERC Order 872, the statement was made, nothing in the text of PURPA requires the establishment of a subsidy per QF. And I think that is very important. We have, and Mr. Atkins had pointed out, Western Farmers has a very diverse portfolio. We have taken a lot of pride in our diverse portfolio and development of renewables. And I think that's something that should not be overlooked for the potential subsidy of developers that are looking for long-term fixed prices that may exceed the avoided cost or market prices.
Do you have anything further, Mr. Caves?
That is it. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Now I have 3 people signed up from P&M: Adam J. Alvarez, Michael Keegan, and Leslie Padilla. And is there one of you designated to make a comment?
Yes, Ms. Amer, this is Leslie Padilla. I'm here. Adam Alvarez is our regulatory case manager. Michael Keegan is with Wilkinson, Barker, and Nauer. He will be making P&M's comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Padilla, and thank you, Ms. Amer, and everyone else who's on the hearing today for this opportunity. I appreciate being able to address the commission. EPE and P&M in this proceeding after the NOPRA filed 3 sets of joint comments, and each party also filed initial comments prior to the issuance of the NOPRA. So I won't try to duplicate all of those, but there are a few issues I'd like to highlight in this discussion this afternoon. And I believe that EPE will be following after me, and their representative will specifically address proposed Rule 570.11 concerning the avoided energy cost rates. Before I get to specific provisions within the proposed rule, I'd like to preface these comments by noting that Rule 570 should ensure that customers are appropriately and adequately protected, because ultimately customers of the utilities actually end up paying for any costs that are paid to QFs. And I think that EPE and PNM are glad to hear that many others have already also made that observation. With respect to proposed Rule 570.9 concerning the obligation to purchase, EPE and PNM agree with the NOPR's proposal to enumerate specific criteria in the rule for the establishment of a legally enforceable obligation. In FERC Order 872, FERC provided guidelines as far as what should be included in the establishment of a legally enforceable obligation, or a LEO. A QF must demonstrate both a financial commitment to its project and that the project is commercially viable. The criteria for establishing a LEO must be both objective and reasonable, and these factors must be within the control of the QF. However, satisfaction of the criteria should also show that the QF is not speculative and that the project is far enough along in the developments that utilities can reasonably rely on the QF and the legally enforceable obligation in their planning processes. Under FERC's PURPA regulations, states have always determined what is required to establish a LEO, and FERC does not actually establish specific criteria. And in Order 872, FERC affirmed that it's the states that have flexibility to determine what is required. EPE and PNM support the 6 identified criteria that are laid out in the NOPR, and in our initial comments, we proposed a 7th criterion, which is that the QF should be achieve certification, either through self-certification or through a FERC determined certification process. And we believe that all 7 of these criteria are objective and reasonable and consistent with FERC's guidelines. I believe some parties have had commented that some of the criteria should not be adopted by the rule, including criteria 4, 5, and 6 concerning a QF's authorizing of environmental studies, obtaining financing or applying for financing, and providing the utility with a construction plan and timeline. However, all of these criteria are consistent with the guidelines established in FERC Order 872. They are not intended to be obstructive. They are objective, reasonable, within the control of the QF. None of these criteria are under the control of the utility, and all of them would help establish and demonstrate the financial commitment of the QF and the project's commercial viability. And then finally, turning to proposed Rule 570.11, EPE and PNM pointed out in the comments that it appears that the proposed rule did not include a provision concerning avoided capacity cost rates. And in the initial comments, EPE and PNM proposed that the Commission should consider just retaining the current rule, which is Rule 570.11C. It may have been an inadvertent error that the avoided capacity cost rule was omitted, but the companies believe that that rule is appropriate because it provides for utility-specific avoided capacity cost rates and ensures that QFs would only be entitled to collect a capacity rate when the utility has a capacity need that the QF is actually meeting. And so at this point, I think I would stop, and I believe that EPE is next, and PNM supports the comments that Mr. Moss will make regarding why all utilities should have the flexibility to establish variable avoided energy cost rates in order to protect the customers from excessive charges.
Well, thank you, Mr. Keegan, on behalf of PNM. And as you mentioned, next on the list is EPE, and I have Ron Moss signed up on behalf of EPE. I also saw Nancy Burns participating, but I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it'll be Ron making the comments on behalf of EPE. And Ron, you're on mute. I still can't hear you.
What about now?
Perfect. But I hear 2 of you. So I think you have
Sorry.
to mute either your phone or your computer. That's been my experience.
Okay, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's good.
Okay, sorry about that. I was trying to do it through my phone because it's sometimes more reliable. Well, El Paso appreciates the opportunity to provide comments here today. And as Mr. Keegan said, I do want to focus on the pricing part of this. And to do that, I think it's useful to compare the FERC rules before and after order number 872. Before order number 872, QFs were allowed to, that had formed legally enforceable obligations, were allowed to demand fixed prices. But the FERC rules about when you could form an LEO were unclear, and some states had pretty strict requirements about that, New Mexico being one of them, about how you had to be ready to interconnect. And in Order 872, FERC said, we're going to make it easier for you to form a legally enforceable obligation, qualifying facilities. But what FERC also said was that a QF that establishes a legally enforceable obligation is not entitled to fixed prices. And the reason FERC said that is because it had taken comments from a lot of people in the rulemaking that said that these fixed prices had resulted in charges that were above the market prices, and customers ended up having to pay premiums over market prices. So FERC undertook an analysis, and they said, we've looked at these markets and we think the LNPs do establish your avoided cost. So what's happening here, as we see from Mr. Marks and Mr. Flax-Davidson, is they want the first part of the rule, which is to say, yes, make it easier to get an LEO, but they're not willing to accept the second part of the rule. And what FERC has said is that, yes, we know you would like to have fixed pricing and QFs, that would be your preference, but you don't need it. We've decided you don't need it. Again, I don't expect Mr. Marks and Mr. Flax-Davidson to agree with that, but that's what FERC said, not just me. And what FERC said was that when we had this fixed pricing, customers ended up paying too much for this power, and we're not going to put the risk on customers anymore. Now, you heard Mr. Flax-Davidson say, well, it can go both ways. Sometimes it's above, sometimes it's down. All right, let's both take the risk. Or I guess what he's saying is we want to put the risk on the customers. We're not willing to take the risk. The variable pricing makes sure that the utilities are always paying their avoided cost, or that the QFs are always paying the utilities' avoided cost. And I know Mr. Flax-Davidson said that prices have fallen in the past, but in fact, they've fallen a lot. They've fallen, a decade ago, there were 4 or 5 times what they are now for solar power particularly, and there are probably double that for wind. And so if customers had been locked into these 10 years ago, they would be paying enormous premiums over the market right now. The final thing I want to talk about is staff's proposal, and we're not quite clear on what staff's proposal is about whether all utilities can use locational marginal prices. The way that we read staff's response comments, they said that utilities in the Southwest Power Pool and the Western EIM could, but other utilities could not. It's our belief that that is discriminatory and that there's no reason to single out utilities like El Paso and cooperatives just because they're not in the Western EIM and the Southwest Power Pool. The same rules should apply to everyone. Thank you. Those are my comments.
Thank you. I was going to get to SPS, but since Mr. Moss raised essentially a question for staff, could staff respond to that at this point?
I don't believe that staff was trying to create different rules for different utilities. And staff's understanding is that SPS is part of the Southwest Power Pool. PNM is part of the Western EIM market, and El Paso will soon be part of the Western EIM market. And staff's comments were directed at the 3 investor-owned utilities. And it was not staff's intent to create different rules for different utilities.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Reynolds. I did not understand that from staff's comments, but I appreciate your clarification today.
Thank you. So last on the list, I have Susan Brimmer from SPS. Is Susan?
Yes, I'm here. So I just want to largely echo the first part of what Ron Moss on behalf of EPE said with regards to the fixed versus variable prices. As he said, ultimately it is the customers of the electric utilities who are going to have to pay for the energy generated by the QFs. And in order to ensure that the customers don't pay more than that, the commission should require that QF rates vary depending on the purchasing utility's avoided cost at the time the energy is delivered, whether QF is entered into a LEO or not. And we also propose several red lines to the rule. Most of those seek to strengthen the requirement regarding that utilities purchase energy from QFs at the variable energy rates. There are a couple of things on interconnection rule that go beyond that, that don't deal with that. And so I'll just highlight a couple of those. We would propose to delete the provision and that's 570.11F of the proposed rule. We would propose to delete the provisions in the proposed rule that suggests that QFs go through a different interconnection process than the normal utility queue. There is no requirement in the Southwest Power Pool, which is the RTO that we're a member of, for a separate QF interconnection process. And if you did have one, that could unduly prejudice other projects if QFs are given preferential treatment. And another one under that same rule is that we propose new language to clarify that states have jurisdiction over the interconnection service where a QF seeks to sell all of its output to the interconnected utility. And in other circumstances, FERC has the jurisdiction over the interconnection of the QFs. And that's essentially it. I won't go any further. We did make quite a few red lines to propose red lines to the rule and response comments as well, but I think a lot of that's already been covered today. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to mention that the most recent commission order allowed, kept the record closure in the rulemaking. It extended it to July 30th, 2021. So parties would be allowed to make further comments after this hearing. And before we conclude the hearing, I would like to actually thank everyone for their comments, but also ask whether or not anybody would like to respond to anything that they have heard today.
Ms. Amer?
Yes, Mr. Marks. Would you like to?
I would like to make them, yes, if
So,
that would make you happy.
That would make me extremely happy. Thank you.
Thank you. And first, I would like to thank all the people who commented today, and it's good. I can't wait till we're all together in person someday again. And certainly Mr. Atkins and the PNM representatives and the other representatives, I think we've all come a long way in and over the last couple of decades towards making a better energy system here in New Mexico. And so even though we disagree on some of the details, it's good to be together with people, even remotely, who are generally looking at the same outcomes. So I would thank everyone for that. I want to clarify that I'm not advocating for that we dispense with avoided cost. And I want avoided cost has to be the basis for pricing under PURPA. Pricing cannot be more than avoided cost. And I'm not saying that the commission should authorize pricing above avoided cost and subsidize projects. I think what is at issue here is that the utilities would like the projects to be paid at current avoided cost without any certainty, and that just doesn't work. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but every single one of these utilities has power purchase agreement, PPAs, and every single one of those has a set price for the duration of that PPA. And if there's any variability in those prices, if it's an escalator, if it's renewable, if it's a conventional gas generator, there could be adjustments for fuel cost. But these utilities know that there's no such thing as a power purchase agreement where the parties are agreeing to buy and sell power at whatever the market rate's going to be. And based on that, somebody's going to build a plant. That just doesn't happen. And so in the absence, so there can be fixed prices. I believe, prices are low now. If the commission set prices based on what avoided cost looks like now, there's very little downside for utility customers for locking in those prices. Certainly when gas prices were high and people didn't have good visibility into the future, PPAs were expensive. And if a PURPA project had been built, it might have been expensive. Today, that risk isn't there. I think the commission is smart enough, having seen the experience, to know that it needs to be extra careful if it's in a period of high prices when it's doing this, and to do a good job of projecting. And I would agree with, or I would concede, I wouldn't agree with Mr. Moss, but I would concede that the Order 872 allows this commission to use variable pricing. It's my recommendation that the commission not take advantage of that flexibility, and that the commission take advantage of the flexibility FERC gave it to use also to implement fixed pricing, because if it doesn't do that, there will be no PURPA projects without fixed pricing. So 872 lets the commission do it either way. And my recommendation is that the commission use that flexibility to create some fixed pricing mechanism that is fair to consumers, that is unlikely to result in, I don't know, whatever the opposite of a windfall is. Mr. Moss used some term, but consumers getting stuck with a highly out of the money contract. So commission, be careful. I think the commission knows how to do that. We're seeing and then also I would respond to Mr. Moss, the FERC Order 872 did not say that FERC was making it easier to form LEOs. I don't know that it really matters at this point, but what Order 872 said was that it was going to codify what FERC had previously said about forming LEOs. But in any event, I think we are in agreement about what FERC has allowed the commission to do with respect to pricing. The formation of LEOs, the words are clear. My disagreement with the utilities is that I believe that the first three criteria, and also I would support what P&M said about requiring QF certification, that's a reasonable requirement. The other requirements are not reasonable, and they're just there to be stumbling blocks and require QFs to commit more costs early in the process and thereby discourage them from even trying. And with that, I would again thank everyone, and it's good to see you all, even if it's by Zoom. And thank you, Ms. Amer.
Thank you, Mr. Marks, for your thoughtful comments. And would anyone else like to respond or reply to any comments heard today?
Miss Amer, this is Tim Woolley with Tri-State.
Oh, yes, thank you.
I was here to listen, but I do want to make a few comments. So first of all, Tri-State is a utility and would be a buyer of energy from a QF. We are not as concerned about the issue of pricing out of an RTO or out of the Western EIM, as long as the rule stands the way as it's drafted. It'd be nice to have locational marginal pricing, but we are not in an RTO, and we're not actually a member in the Western EIM and cannot be because we're not a balancing authority. But we can participate in that market through our transmission interconnections with PNM. But as long as competitive pricing is still an option, as written in the rule and as written in the FERC rule, I think most of the bases are covered. I would like to argue that the draft rule as written really covers our bases and everyone's bases. It allows for locational marginal pricing where available or competitive bidding where it's not. So that's one thing. I'd like to also answer Mr. Marks' comment that he just made that, yes, we do have all utilities, I think, or maybe not all, I'll say most utilities do have PPAs at fixed prices, but those fixed prices are acquired through competitive bidding and or negotiation, not a PURPA put at a price determined by someone else, whether it be a state authority or elsewhere. So yes, utilities have fixed price contracts with PPAs, but they're all done through competitive pricing, and I don't see PURPA as always allowing for that. In the rule as drafted here, it does, so I fully support the draft rule that staff has put together. And then my last comment was we need to make sure we keep straight which rules we're talking about. Mr. Flax-Davidson mentioned something about a LEO only being available after the project is built. Well, that is what the old rule, actually the old rule didn't even say that. That was a more or less a precedent in cases in New Mexico. So the rule didn't state that, but it had been established by precedent in New Mexico. That is no longer what the rule says. The rule does lay out clear guidelines now on what needs to be done to be deemed a legally enforceable obligation. So the old rule is no longer what we're concerned with anymore. So I just, again, want to support the rule as drafted by staff right now.
Well, thank you, Mr. Woolley. Any other comments from?
Yes, Ms. Amer.
Okay, Mr. Moss.
I want to echo Mr. Marks's comments about how it's nice to see folks again. And I've been arguing about these issues for a couple of years now, so it's good to get to renew that again here. I just want to say a couple of things about this, which is about the allocation of this question of fixed versus variable pricing is really about the allocation of risk. Is the risk going to be put on the QF, or is the risk going to be put on the customers? Now, for the QF, they get presumably they wouldn't build a project if they didn't have some profit built in. So if they get their fixed price, they've got a certain amount of profit built in. They may lose some upside if prices go up from a fixed price, but at least they still got their profit there. They just don't make as much profit. For customers, they have the downside. And so when the price goes down, they don't get the benefit of that. yeah, they do get a benefit if prices go up, but that hasn't been the direction in recent years. The prices have been going down. The other thing that I would say about this is that under the proposal of Mr. Marks, the commission is going to end up having to litigate every one of these cases because the utilities and the QFs just probably aren't going to agree on what the fixed price should be over 15 or 20 years. So I think the commission needs to take the administrative efficiency of the variable pricing into effect when deciding how it wants to structure this rule. Thank you for allowing me to respond.
Thank you.
Ms. Amer?
Yes.
This is Ron Flax-Davidson. Again, I wanted to respond, if I might, to the last comment by Mr. Moss. Thank you for that. And I also wanted to make clear what perhaps hasn't been said. I think everyone on this call is very knowledgeable about the situation with regard to QFs and the financing of QFs. And the issue is not much about the developer or the utility. It's about the financing for the generation plant. And so the reason why, as Mr. Marks pointed out, the utilities have PPAs with fixed prices is because as owners of generators, they know that they could not get financing unless they had a long-term fixed price contract. And the same is true about developers, of which I've played that role many times. In order to get financing, it's necessary to have a long-term fixed price contract. And so the concept that we're talking about is how can projects get financing? And if the only way to do that is through avoided cost, it's unlikely to see many projects built. The other side of that coin, that if we build them with a fixed price contract, it's certainly true, as Mr. Moss indicates, that there is some difficulty about predicting the future and what would be a fair price that people can agree to. But on the other hand, it's probably necessary in order to get financing for these projects. And so, again, while it has been the case that prices have come down over the last few years, there's no guarantee of that. And so some of us, myself included, remember when prices were $14 an MMBTU for natural gas. Now they're around $3, and they've been below that. And that means that the price of electricity has come down greatly. And so it's true that avoided costs now are very low for short-term daily LMTPs. But on the other hand, in the future, we can see that those prices could go up. And so trying to find what is the fair price, both for consumers and for the utility and for the developer, does need to be figured out, I believe, if we want to see these kinds of projects built, and therefore a long-term fixed price contract is required.
Thank you, Mr. Flax-Davidson. Is there anyone else who would like to make another comment?
This is Matt Caves. I have another comment.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I would just like to clarify when we talk about a utilities PPA and long-term pricing, that is taking into account more than just the energy or more than just the generating unit. And I think that's a statement that hasn't been made. It includes interconnection costs, transmission, etc. And I think we're comparing two different matters here. If we say a long-term fixed price for a QF versus a PPA. And if all the terms and all the considerations were the same, that would be understandable, but it's not. And I do think that needs to be clarified.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Caves. Anyone else?
Ms. Amer, could you just clarify? You said the record is staying open?
Yes, and I was looking at the order, the most recent order. which was dated June 3rd. And I realized it could have been more clear. But that being said, it says in paragraph 5, the commission finds that it is in the interest of the public to extend the date of the record closure to July 30th, 2021, so that parties have sufficient time to file additional comments after the public hearing on May 28th. And then in the ordering paragraph, it says the record closure is hereby extended to July 30th. And then it says that parties are permitted to file reply comments no later than June 10th. But it should have stated that parties are able to file comments on this public hearing until July 30th. And it looks like it didn't expressly state that, but it did find that. So maybe I can issue a further clarification order to that effect. Not me personally, but ask a commissioner to do that and to state that parties can file further comments until the record closes, which is July 30th, 2021. Is that clear? That that is permitted, and we will try to get a commissioner to clarify that by a single signature order.
Thank you, Ms. Amer. So did they make you the presiding officer for this case?
I wasn't designated as a presiding officer. We haven't been doing that for just rulemaking hearings. But in terms of reading what the order stated, that's my interpretation, is that it was the intention of that single signature order to allow comments until the record closure of July 30th. But I will try to get a commissioner to clarify that.
Thank you. And I just meant if they made you presiding officer, you could have ruled on the record today.
Oh, no, I haven't been designated formally as presiding officer. But that being said, I actually had a question just for my own knowledge. I've done some research, tried to find if other states are implementing rules in accordance with FERC Order 872A. I haven't really found anything. I did find that there is an appeal of FERC Order 872A that was filed by SEIA in the Ninth Circuit. But that was as far as my research could find. Does anyone know if there are any state commissions with rulemaking proceedings going on?
I do not.
I
leading
was
the
told
pack.
there is.
Excuse me?
I said you're leading the pack here, Judy.
Yeah, well, I like that. I read an article that said something about Kentucky, but anyway. All right, well, if no one has anything further, I would conclude the public hearing in case number 20-00175 UT in the matter of potential amendments to NMPRC Rule 17.9.570 NMAC. And it is now 3 p.m.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Amer. Good to see everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Isaac,
Yeah,
there are some terms in this I'm going to need from you. Is that all right?
yeah, certainly.
What I'll do is I'll produce a transcript and get a list together and send it over to you. It'll be in the next day or two.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you for your help.